Valyria was the most powerful civilization in the world, but then it was gone in a day. What and who caused the doom of Valyria? Let's take a look. Hi everyone, this is Robert. Welcome to Deep Geek. On this channel we cover the best in fantasy books and TV shows. A Song of Ice and Fire, The Lord of the Rings, The Witcher and more. If you like the sound of that, there's a subscribe button in the bottom right of your screen. This is the second in a series of videos about the faceless men in A Song of Ice and Fire. What are they? What do they want? And what does that mean for the rest of A Song of Ice and Fire? You don't need to have watched the previous video before watching this one, but it does set the scene a bit, so if you want to check that out first, then come back here, feel free. Valyria was the greatest city the world has known, considered to be the height of architecture, civilization, technology and magic. It was the capital of the Valyrian freehold, an empire that lasted for millennia and spanned most of Essos. The Valyrians were indisputably the most powerful civilization on Planetos. But then, in just a day, it all came to an end. Every hill for 500 miles around Valyria exploded, filling the air with molten rock and hot ash, bringing a fiery death to everyone and everything below. Even dragons in the air could not escape. Massive earthquakes turned the city into rubble, and hot magma bubbled to the surface, turning the seas into a burning, smoking maelstrom. Everything was lost. The people, the dragons, the city, the thousands of years of culture and knowledge, all gone. And just as importantly, magic was also gone. No, not all magic, of course. The magic of the Children of the Forest and the Old Gods was still there in the hidden corners of Westeros, for example, but the kind of magic that had dominated Essos for centuries, the magic of dragons, wildfire and old Valyria, glass candles and forging Valyrian steel, that was all gone. Disappeared enough that the wisest and most learned of Westerosis could laugh at the very thought. As Maester Luwin said to Bran, "Perhaps magic was once a mighty force in the world, but no longer. What little remains is no more than the wisp of smoke that lingers in the air after a great fire has burned out, and even that is fading. Valyria was the last ember, and Valyria is gone." The doom of Valyria is unquestionably one of the most important moments, therefore, in all of Planetos history. Without it, the world of Ice and Fire would have been very, very different. And the curious thing is, there is no one consensus in-world explanation for what happened, though I think we have been given all the clues we need to come to a reasonable understanding. So before we get into why it happened, let's just be clear on exactly what happened. To understand this, we need to first understand that Valyria was quite literally built on volcanoes. The volcanoes, known as the 14 Flames, provided the precious metals, the fertile land, and the dragons that allowed the city to prosper. And according to King Viserys in the first season of House of the Dragon, the volcanoes were the source of the Dragon Lord's magic as well. So this wasn't just bad town planning. Being built on volcanoes seems to have been an important part of the Valyrians' power. The Valyrians kept the volcanoes dormant by the constant attentions of fire mages, we're told. So far, so straightforward. In many ways, the doom was a disaster waiting to happen. Civilizations near to active volcanoes tend not to have particularly long lifespans, and the actual physical explanation of what happened seems to be pretty straightforward. The volcanoes had been held back for millennia, and when they went off, they really did go off. 14 volcanoes erupting all at once makes quite a big explosion. So if that's what happened, the question remains, why? Why then, when the Valyrians clearly had a system in place to prevent it from happening? In the world of Ice and Fire, the Maesters come to the conclusion that it was basically just one of those things. Bad luck, a natural calamity. Perhaps an earthquake triggered one of the volcanoes which set the others off. It's a boring suggestion, but definitely possible. Some have added their own in-world prejudices to this by way of a bigger explanation. Some septons, for example, preach that the heretical Valyrians delved too deep into the seven hells. Red priests talk about the judgment of R'hllor. Historians speculate that political infighting got out of hand and so on, but all these are just guesses. All of Valyria's records were destroyed in the Doom, and any eyewitnesses will also necessarily be dead. To my mind, if this is more than just a natural occurrence, the obvious thing to look at is what happened to the fire mages who were supposed to be preventing the volcanoes from erupting. At least, that's the view of Septon Barth, who speculated that the spells must have faltered for some reason. And as lovers of the lore of George R.R. Martin know, we should always pay attention to what Septon Barth says. I think it's reasonable to suggest that the Dragon Riders wouldn't have killed them themselves. Even in a fit of bloodthirsty political infighting, it would mean the deaths of all of them. So who might have killed the fire mages, and in turn killed all the Valyrians? Well, as it happens, we do have a prime suspect. Actually, not so much a suspect as an admission of responsibility. In the last video of this series, we looked at how the faceless men had their origins in the mines under Valyria, in the heart of the volcanoes, in other words. The slaves cried out for death, and the first faceless man gave it to them. We hear this when the kindly man is teaching Arya about the faceless men. That very night, he chose the most wretched of the slaves, the one who had prayed most earnestly for release, and freed him from his bondage. The first gift had been given. Arya drew back from him. He killed the slave? That did not sound right. He should have killed the masters. He would bring the gift to them as well, but that is a tale for another day, one best shared with no one. So the faceless men brought the gift of death to the masters, the Valyrians. Now, some people have suggested that the faceless men may have done this because they hated slavery and thought the Valyrians deserved it, as Arya clearly thought, but that would be to completely misunderstand what the faceless men believe. Arya herself regularly gets in trouble with them for killing or wanting to kill people who deserve it in her mind, or not wanting to kill someone who doesn't deserve it. To the faceless men, a religious order, let's not forget, death is not a matter of who deserves it. After all, Vala Morghulis, all men must die. No, it was a matter of whether an appropriate sacrifice was made to the many-faced god. Let's go back to that history lesson for Arya from the kindly man. One day, the first of us heard a slave praying not for his own death, but for his master's. So fervently did he desire this that he offered all he had, that his prayer might be answered. And it seemed to our first brother that this sacrifice would be pleasing to him of many faces. So that night he granted the prayer. Then he went to the slave and said, "You offered all you had for this man's death, but slaves have nothing but their lives. That is what the god desires of you. For the rest of your days on earth, you will serve him." And from that moment, we were two. So a slave master's death was brought with the life of a slave who desired it. And later, the faceless men brought the gift of death to the masters, Valyrians, plural. Clearly, this won't have been a simple matter of they deserved it. No, they will have had to receive a sacrifice or gift to their god, and they clearly did. So we know with some reasonable certainty that the doom was brought about by the disruption of the spells that held back the 14 volcanoes. They were kept in place by the fire mages, and so someone presumably killed them. The faceless men claim responsibility, and someone paid the price to make it happen. But who? Let's hold that thought for a moment, because there were a couple of prophecies about the doom of Valyria. One we all know of. Daenys the Dreamer, a Targaryen, foresaw the doom, and the Targaryens escaped to Dragonstone before it happened. We don't know the contents of this dream, but the context, that the Targaryens simply tried to escape and didn't even think about building their own empire for a few generations afterwards, certainly seems to imply that they weren't responsible for the destruction, they just got forewarning of it. But there was another prophecy that we read about in the world of ice and fire. The Maesters report it like this. The wealth of the Westerland was matched in ancient times with the hunger of the freehold of Valyria for precious metals, yet there seems no evidence that the Dragon Lords ever made contact with the Lords of the Rock, Casterly or Lannister. Septon Barth speculated on the matter, referring to a Valyrian text that has since been lost, suggesting that the freehold sorcerers foretold that the gold of Casterly Rock would destroy them. As I said earlier, we need to pay attention to what Septon Barth said, and also to the careful wording of the prophecy. The gold of Casterly Rock would destroy the Valyrians, not necessarily the Lannisters themselves. The World of Ice and Fire also informs us that there are no mines in all the world as rich as those of Casterly Rock, so a lot of gold. Enough to pay the price for the faceless men to kill those fire mages? Perhaps. But what were House Lannister doing at the time? And what were they doing with their mountains of gold? Well, they were trying to buy a Valyrian steel sword from Valyria. At around this time, there was a small but lucrative trade in Valyrian steel swords. The Valyrians would make them, and then sell them to the noble lords of Westeros for a lot of money. This was when most of the Valyrian steel swords we know about came into being, which makes it incredibly suspicious that the Lannisters never came into contact with the Valyrians, because the Lannisters really wanted a Valyrian steel sword and had lots of gold to pay for it, and the Valyrians, we are told, had an unquenchable desire for precious metals, but the Valyrians, presumably wary of that prophecy, just ignored them. Which leads us to this curiously worded section in the World of Ice and Fire. The sword Brightroar, that's the Lannister sword, came into the possession of the Lannisters in the century before the Doom, and it is said that the weight of the gold they paid for it would have been enough to raise an army. Note how it doesn't say that Brightroar was made for them by the Valyrians, just that it came into the possession of the Lannisters, that it happened not too long before the Doom itself, and that they paid what appears to be well over the odds for it. The Lannister gold may not have gone to Valyria, but someone who could provide the Lannister with a Valyrian steel sword did get that gold, and lots of it. Perhaps they bought someone else's Valyrian steel sword off of them, but we don't hear about that. Neither that another family in Westeros gave up their sword or suddenly became rich. But there is another group who perhaps could have offered the Lannisters a Valyrian steel sword. The Maesters of the Citadel had been visiting Valyria for years by this point, learning their secrets. It's possible that the Maesters learned the secret of how to forge Valyrian steel during their visits, but even if they didn't, we know that they somehow managed to get hold of a large quantity of Valyrian steel, and that they knew how to reforge it into something new in their forges in the Citadel, because they regularly produce new Valyrian steel links for Maesters' chains and have done so for centuries. That's a lot of Valyrian steel. What if they offered to make a sword for the Lannisters in exchange for what is described as enough gold to raise an army? It fits the facts. The Lannisters were desperate for a sword, and the Valyrians wouldn't make them one, and the Maesters, well, they would get the gold. But what would the Maesters do with all that gold? Gold that, let's not forget, was prophesied to destroy the Valyrians. Let's try to look at it from their perspective. We're told from various sources in A Song of Ice and Fire that the Maesters hate magic. In order to become a Maester, you have to spend an entire night in a ritual designed purely to show you that magic does not work. They wanted to build a world based on pure reason and learning, not dragons and magic. There are various well-evidenced theories about how the Maesters may well have managed to kill off all the dragons in Westeros after the Dance of the Dragons, so would they not also earlier have wanted to destroy Valyria with all its dragons and magic? Undoubtedly. And in the years building up to the Doom, the Valyrians looked westwards more and more towards Westeros. They took hold of Driftmark, then Dragonstone, and their dragons were flying freely over Blackwater Bay. The Maesters, more than anyone, will have known what this meant, and they will have been afraid of what it meant for them, the masters of science being faced with the ever-growing threat of invasion by dragons and magic. Surely the only way to prevent this would be to end Valyria itself, and they suddenly had a lot of Lannister gold to play with. So, how might all this fit together? And how confident can we be that this is what happened? Well, let's start with the Lannisters. The Lannisters desperately wanted a Valyrian steel sword, but none of the Valyrians would forge one for them. Concerned as they were about the prophecy that Lannister gold would bring about their destruction, so the Lannisters had to look elsewhere to someone else who had Valyrian steel and knew how to make it into a sword, the Maesters of Oldtown. The Maesters, who hated dragons and magic, had grown very concerned about the expansion of the Valyrian freehold. Surely it was only a matter of time before the dragons invaded Westeros itself and made slaves of them all, as they had everywhere else. Meanwhile, a cult of death, the Faceless Men, had been established in Braavos. They had come from the volcanic mines beneath Valyria itself and knew its secrets, and they were willing to kill anyone for the right price. Years later, they will claim it was they who killed the Valyrian slave masters. So all the pieces fit together. The Lannisters paid the Maesters to craft them a Valyrian steel sword. The Maesters used that gold to pay the Faceless Men to kill the fire mages beneath Valyria, and that caused the doom. It's a complex picture, but all the pieces fit. It fits the prophecy that Lannister gold, though not necessarily the Lannisters themselves, would be the destruction of Valyria. It fits Archmaester Marwyn's assertion at the end of A Dance with Dragons that the Maesters killed the dragons first time around. It fits with the Maesters' aims of protecting Westeros from magic and dragons. It fits with Septon Barth's theory that it must have been the disruption of fire mages that caused the doom. And it fits the Faceless Men's claim that they killed the Valyrian slave masters. All the Faceless Men would have to do is coordinate the murders of the fire mages controlling the 14 flames, and millennia of volcanic activity would have burst forth, bringing doom on Valyria, something the Faceless Men were definitely capable of. What caused the doom of Valyria? The Faceless Men, the Maesters, and Lannister gold. But what do you think? What or who do you think caused the doom of Valyria? Let me know in the comments below. Or if you'd like to see more videos in this series, there's a link to the playlist appearing now on the left of your screen. Or to support this channel and get access to exclusive benefits, there's a link appearing now on the right of your screen. Thanks for watching. That's all for this time. I'll see you again soon.